This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
On this Friday, April 21st, we welcome you to Real Talk. It's Jesperson and Hicks. Although, is it, John? I don't know. I don't know if it's really you, man. I can't find your blue check mark. I'm not even sure if I am myself anymore, questioning the validity of my identity. Stripped of the blue check mark yesterday on 420, which was just sort of a low blow from Elon Musk and the team at Twitter, losing the blue check mark on 420.
We lost it. Both of us lost it. Well, I lost mine about 3 days ago. I forgot to mention it to you. And then yesterday, you exclaimed all of a sudden.
I was actually kind of excited.
My blue check mark is gone. And I said, don't worry, so is Katy Perry's, and so is Harry Styles.
And the Pope.
And the Pope. LeBron James still retaining his for some reason.
Yeah, well, because Elon Musk went on Twitter yesterday, and people were pointing out that some folks kept their blue check marks. You know, most people are listening to this going like, who cares about any of this? Yeah. Nobody cares about any of this, except for maybe people that are paying $8 a month now to have their check mark on Twitter. And we can get to that in just a bit. But LeBron James' camp pointing out, they said he's not paid for this. He's not, because there's kind of, I think there's going to be a stigma now. There's an assumption people are going to make fun of people now who have paid for their blue check mark. It totally defeats the purpose. There's no point in having it. Elon Musk himself chimed in and said, I'm personally paying for some of these blue check marks, and that includes LeBron James. And apparently author Stephen King, who's been very critical of Elon Musk and of Twitter since Elon bought it. Yeah. Stephen King going on the record, he says, I didn't pay for this. He says, it says that I've been assigned Twitter Blue. I didn't sign up for this. And Elon Musk responds, you're welcome, namaste.
But what's the criteria for keeping it? If Harry Styles doesn't have his, but LeBron James does, Lil Nas X lost his, Katy Perry lost hers.
All the big stars.
I don't get it. What's the criteria for keeping it?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. For people that either don't care or have no idea what we're talking about, the blue check mark in past, it's been a verification tool. So it was a way of Twitter saying that the NY Times account is in fact the New York Times. It's not just some person that started that account as a parody of the biggest newspaper in the world out of their basement. It actually is the New York Times. Yeah. And for a lot of people, like the small fish in the pond, like me, I remember when I got verified, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was like, oh wow.
It's a great feeling.
Twitter's kind of like, okay, you are who you say you are. You're you either are the head of a company, or you're a media personality, or an athlete, or somebody people can trust that the information coming from this account is the person who the account purports to be. Now, if you pay $8 a month and subscribe to Twitter Blue, anybody can get a blue check mark.
It's the Wild West.
I could start a Twitter account with your name on it, and I could be verified as you. It's meaningless now.
It's really bad. And that's the thing, like especially with big stars, the ones I mentioned, Harry Styles, Katy Perry, Lil Nas X, Nicki Minaj, all these, they have so many people, fan accounts, people trying to be them, that now they're just lost in this muck and murk of a million other names that look like theirs. I couldn't believe it. Lil Nas X, very, very popular rapper, 8 million followers on Twitter, put up a little meme, which was basically him begging on the street for change, being like, how I look now that I don't have a blue check mark. And it's true. It's hard to promote yourself when you don't look like the real person.
Yeah, it is. You know who else lost his blue check mark yesterday? It was the Titan of Talk, Charles Adler. He lost it. So he had this. He tweeted this, and he pulled a magazine cover that I was on last year on Edify, where I was, of course, in the bubble bath, John, smoking a cigar. And he says,
this is hanging in my bedroom.
Yeah, that's right. The Albertan who opened one very big door to me in 2022, Jespo, is also without a blue check mark. Doesn't matter to me, Ryan. We'll still join you, the Prince of Podcasting, every Monday for Western Canada's foamiest podcast. That from Charles Adler, who knows a thing or two about hustle and self-promotion. This is a good opportunity for us to remind everybody that we're going to be off next week. Family Matters, and that means we're going to be back a week from now, but we are releasing the best of Real Talk. Every weekday morning next week at 8:30 Mountain, 10:30 Eastern, you'll be able to catch a special episode of moments that really resonated with us and some of the content, special content, original to those best of Real Talk episodes. That'll be next Monday to Friday, and then Chuck will be back with us the Monday after.
And I like how you package them, kind of in like these 2 packs that they go together
like
well.
themes.
You'll see. Yeah,
they're
it's
like
gonna be great.
themed episodes. That includes, that theme idea, our Real Talk Roundtable today as well, presented by Urban Timber. Earth Day is tomorrow. So what? Does it mean anything to you? I'm not being cynical, and I do believe we all need to save the planet, but what does a day like Earth Day mean to you? Will you turn off the porch lights a couple hours earlier? Will you replace a couple of light bulbs in your house to be more efficient? Will you charge your phone in the off hours when there's less demand on the grid? What does it actually mean for you? We're going to bring in 3 players. We're going to bring in 3, as we say on this show, movers, shakers, and decision makers from 3 different organizations or entities that are working to save the planet and improve the world around us. We're going to talk about reducing emissions. We're going to talk about reducing packaging. And this all starts in about 20 minutes from now, we're going to talk about the impact that climate change has on youth mental health. Fascinating research out of Athabasca University. But first, we want to remind you that this episode of Real Talk, every episode of Real Talk, is presented by our friends at We Know Training. Why go with We Know Training? Well, if you're an association, if you're an organization, a nonprofit that relies on training that has to be reputable, that has to be done right, if you're part of an association anywhere in Canada where training is integral to your mandate, you're going to want to trust that to the pros. Companies like we told you about yesterday, CanCell, that's Ontario's provider of retail cannabis training, they're among the partners that are trusting We Know Training for training that matters. You can check out how they're turning relationships into real wins, how they're delivering fully managed training solutions, taking the stress out of your success today at weknowtraining.ca. Our Earth Day Roundtable coming up in about 20 minutes' time. But first, we want to take a look back at a video that I think it's fair to say shocked the world a short time ago. The leader, essentially, of Tibetan Buddhists around the world, the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, interacting with a young boy. It's I'm going to call it, and this will be unpopular to some people. We're already getting blowback from some of you who are upset we're even tackling this. But that reiterates to me the importance of it. We'll talk about the cultural context here. We'll talk about the tradition and history. But if I'm being honest, if I'm going to give you Real Talk on a show named as such, it's a weird watch. Here's this preteen interacting with the Dalai Lama in India a short time ago.
My tongue.
Yeah, for those of you listening on the podcast, the Dalai Lama invites the boy, after kissing him on the forehead, to suck his tongue. And the boy appears to be incredibly uncomfortable throughout the situation.
My tongue.
The Dalai Lama, in follow-up, or at least his team, issuing an apology, talking about how he regrets the incident. But it's got people talking about a whole lot of things. And some of those discussions are being led by our guest kicking off this episode. Promoting Awareness Victim Empowerment is a charity that's leading an international movement and shattering the silence of sexual violence. It was founded by our guest who's joining us this morning, Angela Rose. You may have seen interviews that she has done on NBC, CNN, Fox News, ABC News, Good Morning America. She's talked to Time Magazine in past. The point is she's got credibility here, and we're grateful that she's making time for us today. Can I acknowledge technical difficulties interrupted our conversation last week, and we're grateful you've made time for us again, Angela. Thanks for being with us today. What was the first thing you thought of when you saw that video for the first time?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. And as a survivor myself and as an advocate in this movement for over 2 decades, I can tell you this has been extremely triggering for survivors across the country and abroad. I'm here in Chicago, and I can tell you how difficult this has been for people to see, because it's not just the act of what happened, but it is the aftermath, and the apology that was given was re-traumatizing for so many survivors of abuse who have seen their experience be shoved under the rug, and for survivors that are still silenced. This has been a really difficult time for survivors, and I just want everyone to know who's listening. Ryan, so many of your listeners either know someone or have had an experience, and so I just want everyone to know that you are not alone, and whatever you've been through, it is not your fault.
This statement of apology from the Dalai Lama's team says, quote, His Holiness often teases people he meets in an innocent and playful way, even in public and even before cameras. He regrets the incident. The statement did not specifically reference the kiss. What do you look for, or how do you process a statement like what we saw from the Dalai Lama?
Well, I think that it's so disheartening when we hear about these types of apologies, not taking accountability or responsibility for such an act that was caught on camera. And I can tell you that these types of, kind of institutions that try and cover up abuse, we've seen it in the Catholic abuse scandal. I grew up Catholic, and I can tell you how difficult it was for me as a Catholic, as a survivor, to see how often perpetrators not only are not held accountable, but excuses are made for their actions that are, so disgusting. And I think it is important. You mentioned in your intro that we do look at Tibetan culture. We do know that the tongue sticking out is a form of respect. It's culturally appropriate for tongues to be sticking out in that culture. But that notion of sucking on the tongue, there has been, since this video came out, the young boy did speak out publicly with his mom saying it didn't bother him, which is fine, to each survivor his own. But this has been very triggering for survivors across the country. And sexual abuse, Ryan, impacts so many people. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before the age of 18. So many of your listeners either have an experience themselves, or everyone knows someone who's been through this. But unfortunately, it's still so silent. And when you see excuses and apologies like what was made, it just helps to keep survivors silent and just keeps that re-traumatization from perpetuating.
I want to credit Dilshad Berman with City News for coverage on this story, and we do want to mention this. I mean, Tibetans that spoke to this journalist have said that they described it as the darkest day of their life. They're saying that the Dalai Lama video was misinterpreted, and the reporter speaking to people like human rights activist Kemi Lamo, who says our grandparents, they showed love and compassion in a similar way. They'll touch foreheads, they'll hug, they'll kiss, and kids will demand for more. And my grandpa will say, quote, I have nothing to give you. Now what do you want? Do you want to eat my tongue too? I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this culture. I recognize, some of the nuance that needs to be part of this conversation. And of course, there are cultural sensitivities in all areas of life that need to be considered. So with sensitivity, but with also the blinders off, and a mandate to speak from a position of what we know, regardless of culture around the world, what we know about interactions between different people of different ages and vulnerabilities and everything else. How would you respond to a statement like that?
Well, I think it is important for people to understand the cultural issues behind this. But the problem that I have and continue to have is that this could have been a real opportunity for His Holiness the Dalai Lama and everyone around him, his team, to talk about childhood sexual abuse. We've had a lot of people that are coming out, SNAP, the Survivors Network of Abuse by Priests. There's been a lot of people in our movement that are speaking out against this. This could have been a really important opportunity to talk about these issues, something that has been silenced for far too long in all cultures. Sexual abuse does not just happen in one culture. It sees no boundaries. It sees no age. And I think that this is something that even with the Me Too movement, we still have a long way to go.
It's been interesting to see. I mean, there I think have been expectations, and it seems to be more the tabloids that are trying to get the Hollywood A-listers on the record. They want to hear from Sharon Stone and Lady Gaga and Richard Gere and all these actors and performers, celebrities that have rubbed shoulders with the Dalai Lama over the years. There has been no statement on the record from any of them. Quite frankly, if I'm advising any of them on this, they wouldn't be saying anything either. But what do you read into that? I mean, is this some form of protection? Is this them refusing to drag him into the muck where they don't believe he belongs? How are you processing that?
Well, the way that I see it, Ryan, is this really does illustrate the notion of bystander intervention, which is the more people that witness a perceived act of violence, the less likely it is that anyone's going to intervene, because people think, well, someone else is going to do it, or I don't want to be the first one to say or do anything. And when it comes to issues of faith and someone who is in such a position of power, it is very difficult to speak up about something like this. And I will tell you that so many survivors find healing, myself included, in faith, find solace in faith. And so the fact that this happened by someone in such a high position of power, his holiness, that's what really has hit survivors so deeply, because oftentimes survivors will speak out even about their own abuse to somebody in their church or in their church community. And oftentimes people are woefully underprepared on how to deal with this. So I just want to say, in terms of resources, that PAVE has some incredible free resources on our website at shatteringthesilence.org, including a course on supporting survivors, because all of us have an incredible role. The first person that a survivor tells, if they react well, it's greatly going to impact that person's healing process.
You mentioned the Catholic Church, and I think that it's just such an obvious reference point here. I mean, it was to be honest, when I first saw this video, I was sort of a little bit in shock, to be honest. At the very beginning, I watched it again to try to see if am I missing, and I just am like, how do I wrap my mind? And then the very all I could picture, to be honest, and like with apologies to Catholics, and their faith means a lot to them, and I get it, but also like no bullshit. Like when I see a bishop or a priest surrounded by altar boys, my mind goes to such an obvious place with such a disgraceful history of serial sexual abuse and predators being protected and promoted within the church. That is a fact, and I don't care if people don't like it, or if it makes them uncomfortable, if it makes them think that I'm attacking the Holy Trinity. It's disgusting, and society has allowed it to happen for way too long. Movies like Spotlight, I think, went a long way in forcing an international real conversation about institutions mired in sexual assault and abuse. How are we doing, would you say, as a society after some of these revelations, after survivors have been bravely sharing their stories, after some of these spiritual leaders, religious leaders have been tried and convicted and sentenced, some of them? How are we doing?
I think, Ryan, we still have a long way to go. We have come a long way. I've been doing this work now since I was 17 years old. 25 years ago, I was catapulted into the role of activist after I was assaulted. I was kidnapped from a shopping mall parking lot, and I became very passionate about this because when I went down to report what happened to me, the detective didn't believe me, and there was nothing done on my case. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of serial perpetrators. My case, he was a repeat sex offender. I wasn't believed by the responding detective. Yet I found out that this man was on parole for murdering a 15-year-old girl. He had a laundry list of crimes. And so it's not just the crime that happens, it's how perpetrators are protected and how our society still wants to blame the victim. We still live, unfortunately, in a very victim-blaming society. Like, they asked me in court what I was wearing when I was kidnapped.
Really?
Difference? Absolutely not. So I do feel like we have come a long way, but we still do have a long way to go. We work with a man who's a former NFL player named John Vaughn, and he was assaulted at the University of Michigan by the team doctor, and this team doctor abused over 1,000 times so many of the male athletes that were there on campus. And all he wanted was a meeting with the president of the university. He chained himself. He basically boycotted and went in front of the president's house camping, asking for a meeting, asking for the university to take this seriously. And that was That never happened. The president of the university would walk out the back door, ignore him completely. So survivors' voices are still being silenced, especially by institutions and people of power. And that needs to change.
Wow. I don't know if you've ever heard of Justice Robin Camp. This is a story a little more local to us, Angela, but there was a pretty high-profile blow up in the province of Alberta where a judge, a senior judge in the province of Alberta asked, first of all, mistakenly referred to a plaintiff as the defendant and then asked her, this was in a rape trial, why she didn't keep her legs closed. If you can believe it. That was from the bench. And it was a major story in Alberta, and I think across the country, it's safe to say, because it prompted a lot of conversations around like institutional attitudes, whether Crown prosecutors and judges were well equipped enough to be hearing these trials, whether police investigators had required, or had enough training required of them to be, sort of the first responders in these types of scenarios, doing these interviews, the sexual assault, these obviously, I don't want to say degrading, but, oftentimes when a survivor of a sexual assault or a victim of a sexual assault goes to the hospital and they're collecting DNA evidence, and it's just such a horrific experience for everybody. And we understand the need to scale up our knowledge and our awareness around that, yet still we see people protected, don't we? We still see so much work to be done based on your personal experience as a teen. And the way that you responded to that, founding PAVE and traveling the country, I'm traveling even outside the United States to speak about this and doing the so-called media interviews. A lot of people wouldn't sign up for that. A lot of people would find it to be re-traumatizing. People deal with the very real PTSD and everything that comes with it. What was different for you? What prompted you to make a life out of this, to make this your calling?
Well, it's a great question, Ryan. And for me, I had incredible support from my family that so many survivors, unfortunately, do not have. So my father, my mother, my grandmother, they were so incredibly supportive to me after this happened. And let me be very clear, mine was a stranger assault where more often than not, the majority of the time, it's somebody that we know and we trust that are committing these crimes. It's a family member, it's a date, it's an acquaintance, it's a coach, it's a coworker, it's someone that's known to us. And when that happens, Ryan, it's so much harder sometimes for people to speak out. But of course, I had my share of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's an interesting thing when your whole body is responding to something as simple as a shadow behind you, or when I wash my face at night, I would constantly feel like someone was behind me. But when you're in it, you can't see it. So getting a great therapist was very helpful for me. But I always knew, Ryan, that this was bigger than me. I always felt this because so many people were disclosing to me right after this happened. And again, with that notion of support, I was able to meet and work with the family of the girl that he had killed. Her name was Julie Angel. And I truly felt like, and I still feel like, she was my guardian angel, but I worked with Julie's mother and sister. And this is when I was a teenager, but we really felt helpless because sexual assault is a crime of power and control. So you want to allow survivors to do whatever they can to get their power back. And the way that I did that is we started a petition drive stating the need for tougher laws for repeat sex offenders. And with the whole community, we were able to get 5,000-6,000 signatures on these petitions and get a law changed that's called the Sexually Violent Persons Commitment Act. So I felt very early on, so many people were disclosing to me and sharing with me that they had this experience, but they had never told anyone. I heard from countless survivors, men and women, that they had been through some type of sexual trauma, but they had never told anyone, and they felt such shame. And so I really wanted to create something that would just try and make a difference in the world. And so PAVE does take a positive approach. We do a lot of work in high schools, in junior high schools, educating on healthy relationships, educating on consent, educating on bystander intervention and how to support survivors. And then on the flip side, so we do the prevention work, but then we also help survivors thrive after trauma. I married my best friend. We have 2 amazing kids. I'm living a happy, joyful life. And I just want survivors to know that living a happy, joyful life is absolutely possible after trauma, but it does include a choice to heal. Healing is a choice. It's not linear. It's not always all the way up. Sometimes it's bumpy in the road, but you can heal, and there is joy on the other side.
Remarkable story, Angela. Before we go, can I just ask you about red flags? I know that you work with people and coach people and help people understand dynamics and when they become, problematic, when warning signs exist, and whether that's in religious institutions, educational institutions, sporting structure. I mean, you name it. Could be anything. A piano instructor, a next door neighbor. Obviously, these happen in many different contexts. What are some red flags that parents should be keeping an eye out for that might not be, obvious and apparent on the surface?
That's a great question. So we see oftentimes people in positions of power, coaches, teachers, friends of the family, that groom children into sexual abuse. And so what these perpetrators will do is that they will form friendships and bonds with these children. And again, sexual abuse is rampant. And I know it's not something that we like to talk about. It's difficult, but we have to talk about these things. And so we talk a lot about safe versus unsafe secrets and safe versus unsafe touch. And so there's so many things where if you're, also allowing children to follow their own gut instinct and their own body autonomy. If my son doesn't want to hug Uncle Jimmy, like, you don't force them to do that. You can teach consent and body autonomy very, very young. I ask my kids for a hug. I'm not going to force a hug on them. When, if we do a tickle game, they say stop, I stop. It's important for them to realize that their voice matters, and there's age appropriate ways that we can talk about these things. There's great books, like My Body Belongs to Me is one. There's so many great books out there that you can talk to your children about this, but perpetrators are often going to use friendship and, creating these spaces where they take the children away from parents. They're staying after school, whatever that looks like. And it's important for students to follow their gut instinct. As a teenager at 17, I saw this guy behind me. He looked like a perpetrator. I mean, if you can imagine one.
Sure.
But I didn't listen to my gut instinct. Human beings are the only mammals on the planet that don't listen to their gut instinct. Not to say that's the survivor's fault. I blamed myself for years thinking what I could have done differently. So it's not the survivor's fault, but we do want to honor that God-given gut instinct. So I think that's important as well.
I'm so grateful you've made yourself available to the show. And again, thanks for rescheduling. We really appreciate it. We were devastated when we didn't get a chance to talk to you, Angela. Angela Rose is the founder of PAVE. That's Promoting Awareness, Victim Empowerment. You can learn more about what they're doing, shattering the silence of sexual violence, at shatteringthesilence.org. Be well, my friend, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Ryan.
You got it. If you want to respond to what you've just heard here, if you feel like we misrepresented the story, if you feel like we missed an angle, if something that Angela said resonated with you as truth, you can send us an email anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Of course, you can hit us up using our hashtag RealTalkRJ on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can follow us on all those platforms. And, of course, you can always participate in our live chat as well. Appreciate that. I see the live chat's getting into it right now, talking politics, which is totally fine. It's this community that gathers every weekday morning at 8:30 Mountain. That's 10:30 Eastern. You got to be live streaming to take part in the live chat. That's the beauty of it. And we also appreciate everybody that's joining us live streaming audio on the Mixler live streaming audio app. We're going to get to our Earth Day Real Talk Roundtable in just a second. 3 expert voices I'm really looking forward to hearing this from. And you know how the roundtable works on Real Talk, right? We invite our guests to basically treat it like we're out for coffees or beers and to feel free to interact with one another. It's a little bit more of a casual or a candid vibe as we kind of kick the ball around, and we talk about our different perspectives and thoughts on something that's relevant. In this case, that is tomorrow, April 22nd, Earth Day, which will be recognized around the world. These conversations are presented on Real Talk by sponsors like our friends at Eden Landscaping, and you can check them out online right now at landscapeedmonton.ca. For more than 20 years, Mike and his team at Eden Landscaping have been bringing outdoor spaces to life, and this is one of these really fun experiences for us as a family. I'm going to get to tell you and ultimately show you what our personal experience has been like. We hired Mike, and we've got a budget we're working with as a family, but we've given him a pretty specific assignment. Make our yard look like it's not bomb central. The dogs and the damage they've done to our lawn has it looking like somebody's been treating that place with I don't know, John, pickaxes and shovels? It doesn't look like I've been mowing and maintaining this place. We need Mike to reinvent it for us to make the space usable for family activities like kicking that soccer ball around, but also perfect for entertaining the adults later at night. I can't wait to show you how they're responding to our specific asks and doing it with the budget that we put in front of them. That's the beauty of working with Eden Landscaping at landscapeedmonton.ca. Hey, you never know who's going to be listening to an episode of Real Talk. Right now, are you a recent graduate of an engineering program somewhere in Canada? Are you a professional engineer with years of experience under your belt? If you're looking for a fresh start, or if you'd like to join forces with a team that's putting people over profits and rapidly expanding, may we recommend you check out apexautomation.ca. You go to the careers link there and you can see what they've got available right now. They're literally always hiring extraordinary people, providing opportunities to develop and reach your full potential technically and as a human being. At Apex, they believe people don't leave companies. People leave people. Explore your new career today at apexautomation.ca. Also want to give a big shout out to our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. And John, I'm going to load up this. This is dedicated to everybody who's joining us on YouTube right now so they can see this. I want to show them the Dairy Queen baseline account. This is the one out of Sherwood Park on Instagram. Why? I don't know why this video resonated with me so much, but if you've traveled anywhere where churros are a thing, you know how much a churro can change your day? It's one of the most delightful indulgences on planet Earth. Well, the new churro dip cone. Yeah, that's right. Famous Dairy Queen soft serve. You know that little twirl they do at the top? Nobody does it like the team at DQ. They dip it in churro-flavored cone coating and then top it with cinnamon sugar. It doesn't get any better than this. The 4-year-olds in your life will love it. The 84-year-olds in your life will love it. The churro cone from Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road DQs. And of course, you know, every Friday, these Real Talk Roundtables are presented by our friends at Urban Timber. They're the ones who designed, built, delivered, and are maintaining this beautiful table, this oak table in our Real Talk studio. And they're also the ones they'd love to do it the exact same way for you. You can check it out at urbantimber.ca. Their new showroom location is also open Saturdays from 10 to 4. In particular, check out the boxcar collection. This is custom furniture that's been designed, that's been constructed using the planks out of boxcars, literally rail cars from back in the day. So no two project is alike. And don't forget, they've also got the premium wood siding and decking. If you're reinventing your outdoor space, trust it to Urban Timber at urbantimber.ca. Earth Day is April 22nd, and it means that, of course, people around the world are going to be looking at their own lives, ideally anyway, and trying to figure out what they can do to make less of an impact, to lessen their footprint on planet Earth. For some, it'll be within the household. For others, it may be in their place of work. And for others, like the 3 guests we're about to welcome to the show, it may be big, bold, audacious plans to transform the way that humans interact with this planet. Nicole Rycroft is the founder of Canopy, and we're grateful to have her joining us today. We're going to be talking about packaging with Nicole. Justin Riemer is the CEO of Emissions Reduction Alberta, and we're going to be talking about some of the work that's happening right here in our home province to cut down on emissions. And Dr. Gina Martin is a professor and researcher at Athabasca University. There's new data out that's showing a parallel, a link between climate change and youth mental health. And we wanted that to be an important part of this conversation. A warm welcome to the 3 of you, and thank you so much for joining us. Nicole, why don't we start with you at Canopy? You've got a pretty cool new thing going on. There's a big, audacious plan, and we're talking about packaging and, of course, a whole lot of other things as well. Will you take us into this?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. It's great to be here. There is a project affiliated with TED, as in the red dot TED Talks that we all love and adore and get inspired by. And it's called the Audacious Project. And Audacious basically look for organizations, NGOs that have bold, game-changing ideas and then look to gather a community of philanthropists and then fund those ideas to really scale ambitiously. And so Canopy is one of this year's Audacious Project recipients, alongside of 9 other really fantastic organizations and NGOs who are doing game-changing work globally. And we've received a $60 million commitment from the Audacious community over the next 6.5 years to remove ancient and endangered forests from our pulp, paper, viscose, and packaging supply chains. And we do that by scaling the production of low-carbon, circular, next-gen alternatives. So rather than us burning straw that's left over after the food grain harvest in the field, or the 100 billion items of clothing that are produced every year, 60% of those are in landfill within the first 12 months. But they are perfect if they're sent to a pulp mill rather than to landfill to make next season's clothing. And so our focus is really going to be on how do we scale up these game-changing, low-carbon and low impact on biodiversity next-gen solutions so that we can remove all ancient and endangered forests from the supply chain and ultimately keep them standing so that they can stabilize our climate and be home for the critical biodiversity that we share this planet with.
People can check out more about this specific project online at nextgennow.canopyplanet.org, and we'll have that in the show notes on the podcast or on YouTube if people want to click on it. Do you think that the world is aware right now when we talk about deforestation? I mean, I remember a lot of talk when I was coming up in elementary, junior high school about what was happening in Brazil, and then you see sort of the Fairy Creek stuff on Canada's west coast, and it puts it back on people's radar for a little bit. But if you were to assess it, if you're a physician delivering a diagnosis here, where are we at?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of work to do, which is why this level of support by the Audacious community is really remarkable. There are 5 billion trees that disappear into paper-based packaging and tree-based textiles like rayon and viscose every year. We are smarter than mowing down 400 and 800-year-old trees in 2023 to make pizza boxes and T-shirts. We have to be. And so really that's what this work is about. We're putting on our skates. There's incredible opportunities for the scaling of next gen all around the world. But also here in Canada, there's incredible opportunity for us to be transitioning away from continuing to log iconic old growth forests like we have here in British Columbia, as well as across the Boreal, and replace it with these lower carbon alternatives that are currently treated by us as waste materials.
Dr. Martin, this is fascinating research, and people can check it out online at news.athabascau.ca. Again, we'll put it in the show notes. The question, research with reach, out of the Faculty of Health Disciplines and Research, is climate change hurting teen mental health? When you're hearing Nicole talk about deforestation, do today's young people know more about it, or does it bother them more, or are they more hyper aware of some of these issues than the generations before them? What do we know about today's youth and how they approach the health of planet Earth?
Yeah, so we do know that young people today are reporting a lot of anxiety and worry around the state of the planet. But what we don't really know that much about is how this is really experienced and how they're coping with that. And so what we've been doing is some focus group work with young people where we ask them about the feelings that they have around climate change, what comes up when they think about climate change, and also how they're able to cope with that. And also what sort of supports they'd like to have moving forward. So we know that young people are active agents in climate action, but this is also a really important developmental time for them. And so we want to be able to support them to be able to act in ways that are meaningful to them, but also recognizing that, we need to support them to do what's important to them, while also considering the impact that it could have on their mental well-being. And what we don't want is people feeling so overwhelmed that they feel like there's no point in acting anymore. So we want to be able to have these conversations so that we can move forward together. but still also you building an understanding of what sort of supports are needed and wanted.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking to kids, this national study, young people, age 13 to 18. And when you're asking them, and again, I recognize that this research is happening as we speak. So I won't be asking you for any conclusions at this point. But when you're asking them about resources or where they turn for credible information or if they feel supported, or to put it candidly, if the older people even care about this stuff, what are they telling you?
Yeah, so a lot of different emotions come out when we do our sort of brainstorming sessions around what emotions are prevalent. So we do hear a lot about worry and anxiety, but on the flip side of that, we also hear about motivation and also inspiration. So feeling inspired by things that other people are doing. And so I think it's important that as we move forward, when we're doing studies, we look often at hope and optimism, which are really, really key important parts, but sometimes we overlook that motivation piece. And so we want to understand that. And so that's something that the young people are telling us, like there's space there to look at that as we move forward in our research. Another thing that we're hearing is that when we asked about supports, the supports that people have is that ability to have conversations with peers or family. But another support that they want is good information from trusted sources about what's happening and what they can do. And so that is something that some people feel is missing. And that's something that we can work towards, improving in order to best support young people. And we were really surprised because we were asking about supports and didn't think information would come out during that conversation. And that's where it came out. So I think that there's a lot of work we can do to improve the way that we are supporting young people as they are going through this important developmental time, but also existing with their knowledge of the changing climate.
Justin, you're the CEO of Emissions Reduction Alberta. Obviously a pretty significant week. And I guess depending on who you talk to, but you can't ignore the fact that Alberta released a climate plan. And I would encourage all of you to comment on that this half hour and use this time to share your thoughts on it. But it does commit, for the first time, Alberta goes on the record committing to net zero emissions by 2050. Can you bring us up to speed before we get into some of the specific projects about the mandate for emissions reductions Alberta and then some of the work that's being done to achieve that?
Yes, thanks, Ryan. Really pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation. So, yeah, you mentioned the plan, and it was a significant release by the Alberta government this week. And ERA, Emissions Reduction Alberta, is one of the delivery agents for that plan. So we've been around for over a decade, and most people don't recognize that Alberta was actually one of the first jurisdictions in North America to put a price on carbon. And so the large industrial emitters put funding through that carbon tax into the provincial government coffers. And we actually invest a portion of that funding into technology that will both reduce emissions, reduce greenhouse gases, and create economic opportunity within the province. And we've had an extraordinary privilege to be part of some fascinating projects within the province over the past several years. And speaking to the inspiration and hope that Gina was talking about, there really is a lot of things going on in this province around emissions reduction that most people aren't aware of. So, for instance, this will be the first year that Alberta is completely off coal-fired electricity in Alberta, and that's astonishing. It's 7 years ahead of the federal schedule, and then that's a really big deal. There's a huge advancements being made in methane reduction. We're on target to reduce methane reduction in the oil and gas industry by 45% by 2025 through a mixture of policy incentives, regulations, and technology that we've helped to fund. Some of the very interesting projects that we've funded in Emissions Reduction Alberta are things like the CP hydrogen train. So this is the first of its kind in North America, a freight locomotive powered by hydrogen. There's 3 locomotives in service now, and we're hoping to see many more into the future. We are also funding hydrogen buses and hydrogen heavy vehicles for demonstration purposes right now within the province, and hope to see those scale up. We're funding things like drones that plant trees, as per Nicole's area of focus, in hard to reach areas or in areas that are burnt out in terms of reforestation, difficult to access areas for tree planters. we're doing things like blending hydrogen into natural gas distribution lines to heat homes and businesses, and taking renewable energy opportunities through high quality fertilizer and food waste. We're also very focused on the circular economy. So the big mining tires that you see in Fort McMurray, most of those have not been recycled. And we've just recently invested in a company that's going to be taking those large tires and recycling them, and shredding them essentially, and putting them into new recyclable material for new tires. Asphalt shingles is another area that we're recycling and supporting. There's a variety of great things happening in this province, and it's important that we get that information out so that others can join in on the movement around emissions reduction. It doesn't have to mean there has to be an economic negative. This can both achieve both economic and job opportunities within the province, and as well as emissions reduction. I think one of the biggest areas of focus over the next little while is carbon capture and sequestration. You've seen some announcements recently. The Heidelberg concrete facility in Edmonton has announced one of the first concrete plants in the world to pursue carbon capture sequestration. We're looking at power generation and fertilizer plants doing the same, along with our oil sands plants. So we're really excited about the opportunities in this area over the next foreseeable future.
It's interesting. I was when you talk about the sort of the economic angle on this, it doesn't always have to be winners and losers. I think it's probably obvious to suggest that there has to be at least some form of an economic case for environmental progress. Nicole, I'd be curious for your thoughts on this. I'm even looking into our live chat right now. Super engaged audience. Cadamus Rex says obviously more biodegradable plastic would be a great start. Others are saying hemp plant proteins that mimic plastic but are biodegradable. And then here's the rub. Somebody says, well, yeah, but a lot of companies may not use this technology because it's probably more expensive. That's probably relevant to conversations about packaging.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a perception that anything that's greener has got to be more expensive. And, there is something to be said about economy of scale. Now, the way that goods are able to be so cheap as they currently are is because there's an economy of scale of production associated with them. And so with any new technology that's coming to the fore, if you're only producing it at a very small scale, then it's going to be difficult to hit the same price points. But at scale, there is actually the numbers that we've looked at shows that you can make straw-based packaging for shipping boxes and, the packaging that comes around most of the household goods that we all buy. That can be manufactured cheaper, if not at price parity, to conventional wood-based packaging. Raw material costs less generally. It takes less water, less chemicals, less energy to take straw and turn it into pulp to then make packaging than it does to cut down trees. And the same is true probably with a little bit more scale up required on the textile side, in that when you cut down a tree, something that can give you a splinter, and then try and break it down to that kind of just the pure cellulose that's going to be that soft, silky fabric next to your skin. You can imagine it's an incredibly energy-intensive process. There's a lot of water, there's a lot of chemicals, and you also lose a lot of yield. If you put a tree into the front end of a pulp mill that's going to make a viscose or a rayon fabric out the other end, then generally some pulp mills only have a 22% yield, and some of them have just over 40%. So you're wasting up to 60% or losing 60% of the forest in terms of the fiber that ultimately comes out the other end. Where if you put a t-shirt in, a cotton t-shirt, you'll end up with 99 to 100% of that fiber coming out the other end. So as these mills are being built at scale, and not just one, we have the first next-gen mill for viscose production now up and operating in northern Sweden, as the second and third mill get built for that. It's anticipated that product will be at price parity, but for packaging, there's no reason that a commercial grade mill would not be at price parity immediately to a wood mill.
I'm curious for all three of your take on this, and maybe Dr. Martin, we'll start with you. Like, as we're talking about packaging, Nicole, I'm thinking of times where I've like felt sick to my stomach and that like I'm part of the problem or I am the problem. We try to shop local as much as we can. We try to not just have it be a buzzword, but every once in a while you do order something on Amazon, or every once in a while you do order something to be shipped to your home. And everyone, I think, has experienced that sort of guilt where you figure they must have shipped you the wrong thing because the box that arrives is the size of a commercial printer, and it's filled with all sorts of insulation and whatever and plastics, and you just go, oh my gosh, and you've ordered like a pair of socks or something. Gina, do the young people of today, let's say the leaders of tomorrow, are they approaching everyday tasks, buying habits, perspectives on energy use differently, like demonstrably differently than the generation before them? I mean, is that evident? Is it obvious?
I think there's a raising awareness, and I would say too, what young people sometimes are reporting is a feeling of guilt or frustration. But these are larger systemic issues. So we do live in a society where, making these individual choices, we have the ability to make some choices, but then, like you said, sometimes you order something from Amazon. And so it's important to be able to have these discussions around how we feel about these things, to not necessarily slip into, I'm a horrible person. And so I think what one of the benefits about this sort of work that I'm doing and other researchers are doing is that it's giving a bit of a language so that we can have these discussions around these feelings instead of just sort of sitting with them, because we've all experienced that, I think, where we try our best and then something happens and then we feel an extreme amount of guilt and frustration. So young people are definitely experiencing that. I think that it's important in terms of our messaging to know these are large systemic issues that we're dealing with as well, so that it's not always put onto the individual.
Yeah, I want to ask the three of you about that. And by the way, we're going to get personal in a few minutes. I want to ask the three of you about your personal perspectives on Earth Day and what are you going to do about it. So I'll give you the heads up on that so you have a second to think about it. But Justin, what do you note in industry? Like we'll talk about, people talk about the big emitters or they talk about big industry. And I'm not being facetious. Obviously, a big part of climate change has been caused by, industrialization and the big emitters and all around planet Earth in countries including Canada. And a big part of our economy depends on that. When you look around you, do you see, sort of like a willingness? Do you see an acknowledgement from industry of the role that industry needs to play? Do you see a recognition of the importance of telling those stories of, I know that people bristle at the concept of social license, but I do think that it is a thing, certainly is a thing. I mean, what are you noticing with regards to how attitudes are changing or not in industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ryan. So I've seen a marked change in industry in a number of areas over the past few years, and more recently an intensified focus on things like decarbonization and improving social license. And it's where the world is moving in terms of this net zero commitment. We're seeing tangible investments being made by large and small companies to address their carbon footprint. And policy has helped, obviously, and incentives and regulatory commitments by governments has obviously motivated companies to now see that this is an investment that they need to make in order to sustain themselves longer term. So I think, the whole climate change and emission reductions and environmental sustainability has been talked about for a long, long time in this province and globally, but we're starting to see much more significant industrial investment in this area more recently, and the actions are backing up the words that were spoken earlier. We are seeing a marked change in this area. I wanted to go back to one tangible example of a circular economy investment that Nicole was talking about in terms of hemp production. So we invested in a company in Vegreville, Alberta, who is taking hemp and making vehicle panels and marine panels for automotive manufacturers now. So in your door panels, you'll actually have hemp produced panels rather than plastic and carbon and other fibers that have been developed in the past. And it's a great example of creating renewable crops and productive crops for our farmers, giving them another outlet for production and distribution, and doing something improved for our environment. And there's so many of those examples happening all over the province.
And Ryan, if I can tag on to what Justin just said, supply chains don't sound very sexy, but when it comes to stabilizing our climate, supply chains are the hottest topic on the planet, right? That's where, more than 50% of our society's footprints lies in the impacts of supply chain, and specifically how raw materials are sourced to make the products. And so we have also seen a huge shift in the kind of like concern and action being taken by business leaders. Obviously, we're working in different verticals. We're working in the fashion industry around companies that use a lot of packaging, be they food or the beauty and personal care sectors. But when these companies take action, the H&Ms of the world, the Stella McCartneys, then it sends a signal back through their supply chain that really creates ripples. And then ultimately, it makes it easier for all of us as individuals, even in that kind of 13 to 18-year-old zone, to actually live more sustainably because the products are more easily available.
Nicole, I had a fascinating conversation last night. It was in a totally different context. It was about wealthy landowners sitting on land, doing nothing with it in cities' downtown cores, and how that can devastate a city's core development and that sort of a thing. But the point is, around the table, a great debate on what's more effective, the carrot or the stick, the incentive or the disincentive. When it comes to packaging, when it comes to getting industry on board, when it comes to individual companies driven by profit, and there's nothing wrong with profit, but driven by profit, where do you land? Like what religion do you believe? I asked that, of course, in candid fashion, but what do you think is the smartest way to influence or impact change in industry?
Yeah, well, that is a question that the NGO community wrestle with constantly. So Canopy is a solutions-driven NGO where we would be a pointy carrot organization. So we really work with brand partners to chart a path for change and to then engage their suppliers in that process, as well as identify where are those game-changing solutions. Are they stuck away in a university basement somewhere and need to be kind of broken out into the marketplace? And how can we enable that? But there's definitely room for, and I think we've seen the power of, legislative initiatives that say, like in Europe, there's a ban on the landfilling of textiles post the end of 2024. That has injected huge momentum into the transition to more circular production in the textile industry. So those kinds of, you need both.
I wonder. This is kind of a question for the whole panel, Nicole. I appreciate you bringing that up again. The idea, we call it fast fashion, right? Dr. Martin, I don't know if we'll see attitudes change on how people approach clothing and fashion and the way we express ourselves through what we wear. But I see even just little trends, but they're maybe not so little, of people doing like clothing exchanges, or people on Instagram story like selling the old coat or the pair of Fluvog boots that they love but that still have life in them. It just seems like more people are open to that and are recognizing it. It's like, for me, I pay attention to stories where the big stuff's happening, like what Justin's talking about, and then I also love the microcosm stuff, the impact that people are making, or the steps that people are taking in their own orbit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of young people, we have seen an awareness of fast fashion, specifically if we're using that example, and looking for alternatives and doing things like clothing swaps, being part of online communities where you can exchange the clothes that you have to keep clothes out of the landfill, and also reduce some of that need to purchase newer clothes, considering the, concerns around fast fashion. And so I think from that, you can really take that young people really are a driving force. They're trendsetters, and they're making their concerns known also with their purchasing power, or by, using that power to not purchase. And so I think that that's a really powerful example. And I think also when you see these these sorts of stories too, it can be really inspirational. And that's important too, like to hold on to the fact that even though things can be quite dark, there's also these amazing inspirational stories that are happening and that we have come quite far. And so that is always useful in terms of fostering some hope and motivation to keep moving forward.
I love that you're talking inspiration and hope and motivation, and these are the words that we want to wrap the week up with. I mean, there's so many discouraging elements to the news cycle, and that's real life. But also, I think these reminders are so important that there's good work being done. There's recognition. There's technological advancement and research, and like Nicole's talking about, funds being committed to it, so stuff can actually happen. Let me ask you the three of this in closing. And maybe Dr. Martin, we'll start with you. What motivates you? Why are you doing what you're doing? And maybe an observation or two from a personal perspective on how you'll approach Earth Day on April 22nd. That's on Saturday.
Yeah. So this is something I reflect on a lot. And one of the reasons I think that the work I'm doing is really personal and important to me is, as a young climate activist who was doing work and, starting to feel really overwhelmed, when I was feeling that way, I didn't have anyone to really speak to back then. So I feel like we're having these conversations, and even though the research is still evolving, I think having this language and recognizing that, there can be a bit of a toll from this work. This is hard work. It takes our energy. Just understanding how we work together and support each other and moving this sort of conversation forward really keeps me going. In terms of what I will be doing on Earth Day, as part of my community, we've organized an Earth Fest, and our theme is celebrating successes. So big and small, we've got organizations coming and setting up booths, but we've also, highlighted a few local success stories where we've made, posters where people can come, and it's going to be presented in our local library. One of the success stories is our local bike bus that our school does. So I was just doing that this morning before hopping on this call. So yeah, it's good work, and it's really inspirational, but it's also fun. It's fun to be part of the bike bus, and it's not necessarily taxing when we're doing it together, although at times it can be.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of heavy lifting to be done, but sometimes that's when your heart gets filled the most, is that you get reminded of what drives your purpose. Justin, how about you?
Yeah, so Ryan, I've been doing economic development my entire career. So I've been in the business of selling hope and opportunity for such a long time. Joining Emissions Reduction Alberta has given me this great opportunity to work with an amazing team and mandate to actually help to promote economic opportunity in conjunction with reducing our emissions. And both can be done. It's not an either or, as we talked about. And this province has some amazing advantages in terms of doing some significant decarbonization and emissions reduction opportunities into the future. And we're seeing new businesses and new sectors of opportunity created as a result. So that really inspires and motivates me. As far as what I'm doing, I'm very practical on Earth Day. I'm actually getting a high efficiency furnace installed.
Oh, there you go. Okay, good. I'm sorry for your pocketbook, but congratulations on the. Yeah, we just got a high efficiency hot water tank, and not cheap, but hey, it's paying immediate dividends. So happy to do it and happy to make that investment. Nicole, we'll give last word to you.
Sure. Well, for me, I get out of bed every day because I have a passion for wild places and the people and the species that we share this planet with, and a conviction that we, can be doing things in a smarter way. So that definitely puts fire in my belly, as well as just, I have an ethos that no one wants to join the army of the glum. And so if you can be out there forging solutions and talking about that, then hopefully that's contagious as well. And then, as a professional tree hugger, every day is Earth Day, kind of in my world. But I'll be taking a moment tomorrow to just, go for a walk in the forests that are here in Vancouver, and just on the local mountains, and just taking a moment to enjoy.
There's nothing like the West Coast walks, I'll tell you. Just
Nothing like it. I'm so grateful that the three of you had made time for us, and in each of your applications, thanks for what you're doing to drive these conversations and the research and actual action on protecting our home planet, so to speak. That was Nicole Rycroft joining us from Canopy, and you can check out more on what they're doing on their website at canopyplanet.org. Justin Riemer is the CEO of Emissions Reduction Alberta, and of course you can check out their website as well at eralberta.ca, and we'll have that in the show notes. And then of course Dr. Gina Martin joining us, assistant professor and researcher out of Athabasca University, and you can check him out online at athabascau.ca. In advance to the three of you, happy Earth Day 2023.
You too, Ryan.
Real Talkers, let us know what you're going to be doing. We'd love to hear from you. I mean, it could be just something simple. Like, it could be something simple in the home, but imagine if every single one of us did one little thing. Putting the producer of this show on the spot.
You don't have to.
I like that from Nicole. She says, as a professional tree hugger, I'm going to be doing this.
I laughed.
In my mind, tree hugger is a compliment, not an insult.
Mine too.
If you're not out there hugging trees, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
What are you going to be doing for Earth Day, if anything?
Because hugging lampposts it's just cold metal, right? We, like my partner Jatinder, like Earth Day is like every day. Like literally 2 weeks ago, she just incorporated this app into our phone, which literally, like, when we buy a product, you just scan the QR code, and it literally tells you, like, if you're buying food, it tells you if it's good for you, but it also tells you where it was made, how it was packaged, how it was set, what it was made of, and then it gives you a percentage of, like, how good this is, how green it is, how good it is for the earth, the environment, and then you get an overall percentage of everything you bought, like, in the month. And it basically tells you if you're a good or bad person. No, but really, like,
I'm worried about that.
But I mean, Earth Day is like every day with her. We're always trying to find ways to be a little more efficient. I mean, I think we should talk about that more. Is some people, like we were talking about the heater you just installed, like, it's not applicable for everyone, but we're trying to do the most we can for what we can afford.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. But there also needs to be compelling, like Justin talking about. There doesn't have to be necessarily economic compromise. It's not a bad thing. It's a very good and smart and intuitive and positive thing to point out. There can be economic benefit from investing in green technology and sustainable projects.
Yeah.
And of course it provides, and I love the angle on youth mental health, because that is a thing. The idea of hope and opportunity and all of these that will drive young people forward in what they choose to do in their careers and how they are in their personal lives. I love this from Tara Lynn. Oh, first of all, let me read this. She says, the roundtable has been so encouraging. We're so glad. We could have done an Earth Day roundtable on how, like, all the forests are disappearing and the ocean levels are rising.
Just so depressing.
We're all going to die. But I like hearing more about what people are doing about it. But Tara Lynn says, I was raised to reuse and recycle. My grandparents' generation always did that. But sadly, it seemed like the world's messaging was to kind of make fun of the so-called old people who would make Christmas decorations from hangers and milk jugs. No kidding. Right? Isn't that true? Like, I remember one of my friends finding out that, I try to bring, this is, again, it's a small thing. I don't think I'm a hero. I don't think I'm, but like bringing home the Ziploc plastic bags that the sandwiches in to, like, rinse them out and reuse the Ziploc bags. Like, that's just like a tiny, small little thing.
Ziploc bags were like the first thing to go when me and my partner got
kind of
married.
Paper ones?
Oh, we don't even use them anymore. Like, we use things like little mason jars or whatever.
Well,
but
you just bring entire loaves of bread here and just make sandwiches.
But also, like, plastic bags were the second thing. Like, we don't have a plastic bag in the house anymore. Everything's reusable. Take bags. There's a bag of bags in the car. So yeah.
Mark Doran, fierce advocate, says, you got to think, like, cancer, Parkinson's, ALS, MS, there's ties to breathing methane. He says maybe Albertans will get motivated to reform the energy regulator to reduce these harmful emissions from upstream oil and gas. Hey, Mark, a note for you and everybody else. We've been corresponding with the Auditor General of Alberta in that office, and we believe that we're going to have an interview coming up. We're going to talk about the look that the Auditor General took into the energy regulator and some pretty significant findings there. We're working hard behind the scenes to coordinate that interview. It's easy to get people off the record. It's a little tougher to get them on the record, but we know you expect that of this show, and we want to deliver there. It's great to hear from Barry from the Goat Barn. It's been a while since I've seen him in the chat. This guy, Barry, has been just a longtime supporter of our talk shows and a real beauty. He does keep goats. As a matter of fact, We were raising funds for charity. This was a few years ago, a rooftop patio party that raised about $45,000. No big deal. And Barry agreed. Barry said he'd like to donate a goat to the patio party. He said you can put it on a spit and everyone can roast it. He said, or we can just have it live running around on the roof. Your choice. So that was Barry. Johnny didn't like that one.
I'm horrified.
Yeah, people chose to let the goat live.
Well, I would hope so.
He says, I think there were recent plans for another straw plant near Edmonton. He said, but I don't see it being viable. Interesting. That story out of Vegreville, that caught my attention with hemp. That's pretty interesting. I think people have always sort of thought that this, that the hemp product movement has just been like a bunch of hippies that are trying to find ways to grow more pot
really
plants.
not.
But that's like a complete misunderstanding of the potential of hemp and the history of hemp.
You could literally make like anything out of hemp.
Hemp has been used for decades.
Yeah.
You could even argue in some contexts for thousands of years. And I think it's a plant that's greatly underestimated. By the way, speaking of pot, if you missed our 420 episode, a special episode yesterday with Professor Tim Caulfield talking about CBD, are you one of those using the topical creams, the lotions, the potions, the oils that swear by them? Caulfield says that he believes the public is being misled on the marketing of it. He says he's not anti-cannabis. He says he's not anti-CBD, but he says we need to take a closer look at it. It was a great conversation. And then Jody Geese Riemer, formerly known as Jody Emery, Canada's Princess of Pot, joined us to tell us why she was bummed out about 420.
Yeah, we had an amazing TikTok up too. Here's a little window. So TikTok is very strict about drugs, especially.
Oh, is that right?
So our TikTok got taken down yesterday.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the first one, it said abusive or drug-related content. So I looked into it. I'm like, whoa.
Oh, that was the one where I was taking the huge bong rip.
No.
That was the other one.
It wasn't even, like that clip, we weren't even talking about anything. It was, yeah. So anyways, if you want to see our shorts and everything from yesterday, YouTube or Instagram.
Okay. We're, by the way, in today's edition of Trash Talk, we do have today's Trash Talk, 2 submissions. Michael and Avery, you've been tapped on the shoulder here, and you're coming in hot. They're both responses to interviews on the show this week. So that's kind of interesting. That's the theme of Trash Talk this week. These are responses
taking
to interviews.
aim at guests.
Taking aim at guests.
Wow.
And we love and respect our guests and appreciate them, but also that you step into an arena like this and you say something that's going to push people's buttons. A show like this, there's an opportunity for the audience to respond, and that's what you sign up for, and so I'm looking forward to that. It was great to have the good doctor joining us, Gina Martin, and of course I do want to remind you that she is doing this research. She's chairing and quarterbacking this national research project out of Athabasca University. That's right, it's Canada's open university. It's dedicated to the removal of barriers that restrict access to and success in university-level studies. AU is increasing equality of educational opportunities for adult learners worldwide. Well, how are they doing it, you ask? You just go to athabascau.ca and you click on the About AU link, and you can learn more about exactly how it all works. Tens of thousands of Canadians look to Athabasca University for a flexible, intuitive approach to post-secondary education, and it's one of Canada's top research universities. The proof is everywhere, including guests featured right here on Real Talk. You can learn more about how AU works by checking out athabascau.ca. Speaking of audience feedback, you know the tweet I'm talking about. Would you load up the tweet for me here, Johnny? This was from a real talker that was in touch with us. A big shout out to Kathy, KDB79 on Twitter. Give her a follow. She says, after listening to Jesperson rave for years about the sourdough cinnamon buns from Friesen Brothers, I finally got a chance to try one today when we stopped there in Hinton, the gateway to Jasper National Park. Nice job, Kathy. She says, I'm very happy to say Jesperson was not wrong. It's going to be hard to save the other one for my husband. Well, I hope that Kathy's husband had an opportunity to try one as well, but if he didn't, hey, that's the way the cinnamon bun crumbles, as they say. Kathy, next time, buy 4 or even 8 from the 16 Friesen Brothers locations across the province of Alberta. We're really proud to partner with them. Speaking of proud partnerships, we talk a lot about Complete Care Restoration. That's the team, the incredible team. We know them all on first name basis. It's like Kelly and all the guys that work with Kelly. They started this company in a garage in Edmonton, and over the years, it has developed into the most trusted name in disaster restoration in Alberta. You can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. The next time that you encounter a nightmare, we hope it never happens, but if it does, if you hear that shriek from the basement, when your kids go down to take the laundry out of the dryer and they realize there's like ankle deep water down there and you go, oh boy, remember, Complete Care Restoration's there to figure it out for you. Mold and asbestos removal, as well as construction and renovation projects. They do it all. You can give them a shout at 780-454-0776. Are you one of the Albertans that's paying too much for power right now? Are you looking at your natural gas bill and wondering, quite frankly, how you're going to meet your family's needs when it comes to the finances this month? Take 2 seconds to check out parkpower.ca. You can compare rates on electricity, natural gas, and internet. One of the coolest parts about Park Power is this company gives back to charities and nonprofits where they live and work. So when you sign up to take your business there, you get to choose which charity is going to benefit from your electricity business. Isn't that amazing? We chose our charity. You can choose yours. It's a personal approach. We love that take on philanthropy from Park Power. The promo code RealTalk23 can knock a few bucks, up to $150 off your first bill at parkpower.ca. Also, a big shout out before we get to trash talk to our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy. The one thing that they want us to remind you right now is that they're hiring. That's right, they're getting into their busiest time of year. You can check out what they're doing with home and commercial and industrial and agricultural solar power systems in Western Canada. That's BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories. But they're looking for installers. They're looking for people who've either got their ticket or apprentices working their way there. If you want to travel Western Canada or work from one of their home offices, their head offices in Edmonton and Kamloops, if you want to be participating in getting Canada closer to sustainable energy goals, closer to net zero, why not go to kubienergy.ca today? You can follow the links to send them your resume, your CV. You could be the next team member at Kubi Renewable Energy. You ready for this?
As ready as I'll ever be.
You didn't answer the question.
Yes.
Here we go, John.
I'm ready.
Every single Friday. It feels like a Friday in here, doesn't it? This is good.
Well, it is Friday.
We'll let people know as well. Again, just a reminder, we're off next week. You can catch the best of Real Talk. There are going to be special episodes, special edition episodes you won't want to miss. Let us know what you think about the format. It's something that we're experimenting with. We think you're going to like it. These are some of the interviews that really made an impression on us. Like days or weeks or even months after the fact, we're still thinking about them. You know those ones? The ones that people send us the emails and they say, when Johan Hari said this, or when Bean Gill said that, or when Quick Dick McDick said this, it made me think that. We also get emails from folks sometimes that, well, maybe aren't as flattering. They're not as positive. Maybe they want to clap back at a guest that's used this platform to put something out that they don't feel is accurate or right. And right now, an opportunity, courtesy of our friends at Local Environmental Services, to showcase a couple of those bits of correspondence. Every single Friday, Local Environmental presents a tradition we call a Trash Talk! Yeah, that's right. And this one from Michael, who says, I was listening to Adam Sweet on your show, and he was talking about Alberta's climate plan and talking about hydrogen. And to be honest, Jesperson, he pissed me off. He came across as a propagandist, a marketer, and I believe that in 3 ways this could hurt the province. Wasting money and resources, in time, transition time I'm talking about, and thirdly, in giving false hope or expectation around the next big thing. You know, the very first things out of his mouth are Alberta oil and gas, and then hydrogen, and then carbon capture. All of this, says Michael, unsustainable and unviable. He says any talk about Alberta oil and gas always comes from a place that ignores that the rest of the world also produces and supplies it. Michael just throwing punches today. He says Alberta's oil and gas is not special, and as the world transitions, it will be needed and desired less and less. He says we're living and looking at the past with conversations like this. Now, carbon fiber, which Adam talked about, is indeed a growing and expanding industry, but the issue gets back to this. It can be produced from anywhere in the world. Now, Adam did talk about shipping bitumen and all of the emissions that go along with that, and you should listen to the interview if you missed it. He says, but let's also talk about hydrogen. Back to Michael. Any funding toward hydrogen projects outside of research is a waste of money. It's a greenwashing. It's a siphon for corporate ownership. It's executives and investors to steal government cash through subsidies, grants, and other fiscal mechanisms. You know, Edmonton's hosting like this big, huge carbon convention next week. The timing of Michael's email, very interesting. He says hydrogen production, Alberta's never going to be a global producer or exporter of hydrogen. It's unstable. It's expensive to transport. And he says in Alberta's at a massive disadvantage because we don't border an open body of water. He says our Albertans going to be happy when we start pulling water from our rivers, lakes, and underground reservoirs to produce hydrogen. Michael says anybody pushing hydrogen or championing it at this point in time for commercial use is no different than the monorail salesman from The Simpsons. Monorail, monorail, monorail.
It's going
monorail. Michael says the public does need to be aware of greenwashing, Jesperson. We need to call out companies and organizations behind them as well as our elected representatives to sign off on these things as they're doing it, reminding them they could do more harm than good. He signs off, thank you for your time. A very polite Michael. I wonder if we're going to hear back from someone on this one, on Michael's take on hydrogen. And what about this one from Antagonized Avery? She says, honestly, guys, I was a little disappointed in Jody Geese-Ramsey on the show on your 420 episode. As somebody who is strongly in favor of decriminalization, harm reduction, and safe supply, I want there to be strong voices to advocate for these issues. Instead, Jody's interview felt like a hypocritical, woe is me kind of a moment filled with exceptionism and unacknowledged privilege. She bemoaned how unfair and corrupt it was that the government and public service officials profited from cannabis sales in the early days of legalization. That's a fair point. It oozes corruption and inequality, but with zero self-reflection or acknowledgement about she herself profiting from the cannabis industry. I mean, when Jody was charged with multiple drug-related charges pleading guilty in 2017, she and her then-husband claimed it was for activism, and the justice, Leslie Chapin, who tried her case, acknowledged it as that much. She said she had to recognize how much profit was made. It made Jody come across as bitter about the tide turning from her profiting to other people profiting. If she was truly doing this in the name of activism, wouldn't she have set up as a non-profit with the proceeds going back into the community she claims to support? Avery says, finally, the thing that was so unbelievable that prompted me to write this email when Jody likened her cannabis retail manager license declined to a same-sex marriage activist being denied the right to marry after legalization. What the actual fuck? This is giving me Danielle Smith claiming unvaccinated people are the most discriminated against in history vibes. You know, Jody, from one cis white hetero woman to another, your fucking privilege is showing and you need to check it. How is a license to run a business in any way the same as being allowed to marry somebody you love? You got a million other ways to make a living. You know, this community's been discriminated against, persecuted, and killed for simply loving someone. How dare you invoke the struggles of another community who objectively have been persecuted magnitudes more than the cannabis-using community to whine about not being able to run a business in Ontario? She says, honestly, go to your nature retreat on Bowen Island, one of the most white woman privileged things I've ever heard, and reflect on how you can amplify other marginalized voices instead of using them for your pity party about not making more money off the people you claim to advocate for. That from a very antagonized Avery. Nobody pulling punches today. My second week in a row landing an email into the plants behind me.
He's gone.
That's another 3 points for this guy. Friends, you can send us a trash talk anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. It is proudly presented by our friends at Local Environmental Services. The very best of Real Talk coming at you next week. We're back live the week after with a lineup of interviews you're not going to want to miss. Stay safe out there this weekend. Happy Earth Day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harmon Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta, on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.